Macros are used primarily to automate data processing. These are like the batch files that we had in the scan program. They're very easy to create, and there's a great deal of flexibility built into them. So let me show you first just how easy it is to create a macro, and I'll show you some of the more fun parts along the way. So we'll start out first. Here I've got a data file, and I want to record all of the processing steps that I do with it. So first I'll create a new macro. It gives me the name automatically, so I'll just use that. And then one of the extra things is I'm going to add a banner at the top of it. And I could type it in, but I've already done it. And it saves the text that I've typed in the past, so I don't have to type it in again. And what it will look like is up here, it'll say sample macro. Alright, so now let's go through and do the analysis. First thing I want to do is to invert the polarity because I like positive going up. I want to take off the common average reference and use the data as they were recorded. I'm rescaling it. And I want to do some filtering. And we've got some channels that are flat lines or not of any interest at this time, so I'm just going to select them and then not show them. So now in the file we've got prominent pulse artifact going through it, and we have an occasional blink. So I'll get rid of those real quick. So in the first pass we'll get rid of the pulse artifact, and these are explained elsewhere, so I'm just going to go through rather quickly and just reduce or remove them. Okay, now we'll do the same for blinks. And I'll use PCA to reduce them. And now scan the data. First time it scans it, it'll take out the pulse artifact. And second time through, it will reduce the blinks. Now that that's done, I'm ready to create the averages. So go to the event list, and we have type 1s and type 2s. The type 1s are the evoked responses to tones that are presented, and the type 2s are the EPs to pictures that were presented. And these are alternating tones and pictures throughout the file. I'm going to look from -200 to 500, and I'll go ahead and do the noise statistics on here. Let's before I do that, we'll throw in a little bit of fun, and let's say we want to add text to speech. So what this will do is take anything that you type in and present it during the playback of the macro as a voice. So if you're writing a macro for your graduate students to execute, you might put in some important comments here and there. Okay, now I'm going to set the parameters for the noise statistics, and I'll just use the ones that come up, and I will scan for that. And this is simply a way of helping you decide which epochs you want to include or exclude in the averages based on the signal to noise ratio for each epoch. And this is using all the channels to create the SNR. Now that this is done, we might stick in another direction, and this time we'll say to set the minimum and maximum thresholds and then enable the reject button. So I will say simply OK at this point, and I'm not going to actually do that now because that would then be recorded in the macro. Instead, what I'm doing is putting the instruction in and putting in a pause, and then when we replay it, we can stop and set the thresholds and then go on and continue with the analysis. So let me close that and we'll just continue. So we're going to create the averages for the type 1s and the type 2s. So now we have the results for the type 1s, which I'll put into a butterfly plot, and these are the results for the type 2s. So I want to save these, so I'll deselect the type 2s using the spacebar, and then save just the type 1s. And I'll stick them in a different folder, and we'll just call these tones. And I'm going to tell it to save only the ones I've selected, and I'm going to create a new subfolder in the database, and we'll call these averages, and then save that. Now I'm going to deselect the type 1s, select the type 2s, save them. And I'll call these pictures. Also added to the database. Alright, and now I'll stop the recording. If we want to test out the macro or actually use it with this particular data file, then we'll do that now. Notice that it created the subfolder with the tones and the pictures average data files in it. Okay, so now let's run the macro. So we've opened up the data file, which you don't have to do. You can run it without opening it. And let's run it. And here it says sample macro, the banner that we put in. And then now it's going through the steps. So now it's taking out the pulse artifact. And now it's reducing the blinks. And we should hear that wake up warning in just a second. If I get closer to the speaker, maybe you'll hear it.
Wake up. The study is important.
Okay. So now it's doing the computation for the SNRs. And when that's done, we should get the instruction appearing. And now it's telling us to set the min-max thresholds and enable the reject button. So I'll pause it, and let's bring this down where you can see it a little more easily. So I'll set the min-max thresholds this time, and set the reject button, and instead of the 1048 epochs, we now have 962. So close that and just hit play to continue. So now it's creating the averages. And it's asking me if I want to replace the file that's already existing, so I'll say yes. If I say no, I can change the file name and save it somewhere else. And so now we're done. And if we look over in the database, we've simply recreated or replaced these files. Alright, so that gives you the basic idea of what a macro can do. Some of the questions that you probably have are, can you play the macro across multiple data files? Yes. One way you can do it is to loop it over files. And so in this case, if we click it, I don't have a folder that has a lot of files in it. I'm not sure I have a folder that has many files in it. But if we did, we would simply select the ones. They all need to be in the same folder, but we simply select the ones that we want to use. Or we can loop over studies in the database. So in this case, I have created copies of the same data file. And let's say all of these were subjects that were in your study, and you may have any number of them. So we'll just highlight the parent and say loop over studies, and then it's going to ask us, do we want to use all of them that are under here, Or do we want to use just the one we've selected, or just the children, grandchildren, and so on? So if we say just the children, that means we're going to use just these 3 studies. And if I say OK, then it's going to tell me there are 3 studies, and it would then run the macro on all 3 of them, which I'm not going to do, but it'll be the same thing. So yes, those are the 2 ways you can loop it over individual files or over studies in the database. Another question you probably have is, can you automate it so that it saves the data files automatically but with a unique file name? Yes, you can. In this case, I just tell it to ignore file names and ignore the save as pop-ups. And then we have a rather complete method for deciding how you want to save them. In this case, I'm going to save the files to the desktop in a results folder that I created, where the file name starts with the study name and then increments with a number. So if I ran this right now, what we would see at the end would be, instead of tones and pictures, we would see macros 001 and macros 002. So yes, you can automate the saving of the files so that they each have a unique file name. So let me conclude by saying that macros are not only good for automating the analysis, which will save you time, but they also ensure a standardization of your procedures so that you make sure that you're analyzing all the data files the same way. And lastly, if you save the macro along with the data files, you have a record of what was done with the analyses.